I don't think you are prepared for some of the takes that I am about to share with you, because some of these placements are not where you would expect. And before we start, may I remind you, this is about a combined lineup and which excites me the most, and that I'm prepared to not put Ferrari at the top spot. You know the drill. Worst to best F1 driver lineups going into 2025. Let's get on with it. I think it's quite obvious. Number 10, it's Alonso, Stroll at Aston Martin, because they are operating like they only have one driver, with an arm tied behind their back. Fernando Alonso, I'm not worried about him at all. Absolute godsend to this team, and a true example of what a team leader should be like. You know, especially after he mellowed out after his 2-season break from Formula 1, it looked like he was a changed man. Sure, we still get to see the mercurial force that is Fernando when things aren't going his way. But now we are seeing more and more about him really getting to grips with the team, him believing in the project, and the project believing in him. You get the sense that people, they're really rallying behind him. That whole thing in Brazil, when he just fought back and managed to really pull off that excellent effort getting past Joe despite being a whole pit stop down, and then pulling him out of the car because he had a major back injury, that was a sign of solidarity I rarely see from the other side of the garage. And you might be thinking I'm harsh toward him, Lance Stroll, that I'm only doing it because it's the norm, but like I touched upon in my video on the matter a couple of days ago, Lance has not shown any signs of learning anything from the most experienced driver in the sport's history. From the way you look at them and how they interact with one another, you'd be thinking that 2025 was the first season they were actually working together. You wouldn't think that actually Fernando and Lance have known each other since Lance was a wee boy at the Ferrari Driver Academy back in the 2010s. And in regards to performance, the uneven balance of Alonso Stroll means that this team will struggle to even come close to challenging the top 4 teams in the final year of these regulations. And for those thinking that Adrian Newey will come in and save the day for them this season, you are sadly wrong. Because in recent days, Adrian Newey has now come out to say that Red Bull were really good in terms of blocking his tools, meaning that he was not as effective as he would have liked to have been in terms of getting to grips with the 2026 regulations, meaning that he has said that he is going to be going into 2025 when he starts work in March with Aston Martin 2 whole months behind. Papa Stroll and Aston Martin will be putting him solely on the 2026 car, so that means he can actually figure it out, catch up, and then maybe try and come up with some interesting little doodads and what's-its that might make the team get some little bit closer toward the front-running teams. That's his main priority, so don't expect Aston Martin to suddenly be troubling Mercedes or Red Bull anytime soon. So yeah, this really aspirational team in their final year in this regulation cycle might be troubling to maybe keep themselves away from being a backmarker team. That's how close it's becoming. Sure, the team has managed to secure the services of Enrico Cardile joining them from Ferrari. That might be some comfort, but there's already been a fair bit of work on the MR25 before his arrival. And it's also a matter of the drivers converting these designs into points and podiums, ideally. And I'm not worried about Fernando at all. He's more voracious than ever to get his mitts on Adrian's first design, so he's going to be fine. Lance, well, it's come to that point where it's really hard to tell whether or not he even wants to be in Formula 1 anymore. And considering that there are 6 rookies coming into Formula 1, including Behrman and Lawson, who have had some track time, and maybe Colapinto making an appearance sometime maybe in 2025, who knows, these young guns will be wanting to go after Lance and eat him alive. Next up, there is Yuki Tsunoda and Isaac Hadjar at Racing Bulls. And by contrast, when it comes to the desire of being in Formula 1, there is a huge leap forward away from Aston Martin. Yuki and Isaac, no doubt about it. Both of them want to be here, and they're hungry to justify their place at this team and beyond. Because you've only got to look to Yuki Tsunoda, who's going to be going into the 3rd season of being the 2nd Red Bull team leader and wanting to prove a point after being absolutely and undeniably snubbed for the role next to Max Verstappen. All of the stuff that he was doing in 2021 has basically left a black mark that he can never ever hope to remove, that he failed in that regard to build a really solid reputation of not being a loose cannon. And that's really sad to hear, that he's accepted this and basically just gone, yeah, them's the breaks, I guess. But I hope that he can now focus that energy in proving Red Bull wrong and making sure that Racing Bulls have a darn good effort to be able to try and emulate the performance that we did see in 2021, because that is really important to consider here. Yuki's rookie year, next to Pierre Gasly, that team was so close to be actually realizing Franz Tost's dream of having the Faenza-based team 5th place in the Constructors. And not to mention in Abu Dhabi, Yuki was almost on the podium. But people don't really remember that, nor they want to acknowledge that. Instead, they just go, haha, little Japanese man angry on radio. And in a way, we've got the F1 TV directors to blame, because who's in charge of putting out which radio messages to the world feed? Them guys. And that's who Yuki can blame for where he is right now. As a result, he'll be fired up to prove a point not just to the team that denied him, but also to any other team who might be having buyer's remorse going into 2026, and to prove people that he has definitely matured. And that might come at the expense of one Isaac Hadjar, him going up against an absolute unstoppable force. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not condemning Isaac Hadjar absolutely right from the get-go before we've even been at pre-season testing. He was a major and legit contender for the F2 Championship. And also, you've got to take into consideration that had it not been for the huge amount of unreliability that Campos F2 car had, as well as the fundamental unreliability of the entire widget for all of the other teams, and of course some very, very serious team errors, Isaac might have completely romped home with the F2 title far before the F2 season ended. There would have been a huge gap between he and Bortoleto, but ultimately, that didn't happen. Now, absolutely, Hadjar has the competitive edge to maybe have a chance in F1, but when it comes to how he handles the cars themselves, he's not really given me much confidence and assurance that he will be able to hit the ground running from race 1. Now, I know that many people might be pointing out that, oh, wait a minute, well, Hadjar was faster than Tsunoda in the RB20 in the Young Abu Dhabi driver test. Well, that is very true. The times do say that. But as I do have to remind people, testing times, including those ones, are something you should be really taking with pretty much the Red Sea's equivalent of salt. You're going into the winter break. Teams will want to ensure that there is a narrative going into these next few months, most notably with Williams and Mercedes. Sainz does really well. Antonelli does pretty well, being 5th fastest. People will be talking about that. Hadjar being ahead of Tsunoda, that's the same thing, to make it look like that they are compelled to not put Yuki in the RB20 and that Hadjar has what it takes. But I'm not really seeing many people talking about that, so I think Red Bull failed to make that land. Because another thing that people will be muttering about is that both drivers have a history of angry radio messages. And whilst it was unfair and it really denied Yuki the chance of getting up to the top spot, and it was really unfair, Isaac, he's even more feisty. It would be wrong of me to not mention that if people are still hung up over Tsunoda's past. As a result, I have a real serious doubt about how Hadjar will handle his rookie season in Formula 1, because you have got a really fired up and stoked team leader who will once again want to win over his teammate and yet again prove that he does have what it takes, but then there are just stereotypes getting in the way, undeservedly so, and that might stoke the ire of the French Algerian, because even though he was fast, he earned his spot in Formula 1 fair and square with 2nd place in the F2 Championship. The fact remains is that Hadjar makes Tsunoda look like a very cuddly and timid pussycat. There are a lot of ambiguities regarding Hadjar, but I hope that he will do well. And let's not forget, it's up to the team to provide them a car that will actually be good when it comes to upgrades and that they don't muck things up in the pit stops, because otherwise that's going to be turning both of them into 2 balls of rage and frustration, albeit justified, because can you blame them for getting mad if they're doing really well and then a really bad strategy ends up compromising them, or the car gives out on them, or something that is hoped to make the car go faster makes them either not go as fast or slower? You know. Then there's Gasly and Doohan. Unlike with Aston Martin, I feel that Jack Doohan over at Alpine is more than keen to prove himself in F1, him finally getting a chance with the Alpine team, and most notably becoming the first ever Alpine Academy driver or Renault Academy driver to actually drive for that Enston-based team. And when you combine that with the established talent of Pierre Gasly, as well as his extensive time as team leader going all the way back to 2020, the team has got themselves a fairly good egg in the number 1 spot. However, unlike with Aston Martin, who backed Lance without question, Jack is fighting for his life, undeservedly so. You just get the sense that Oaks and Briatore, they're merely paying lip service, like this is a token gesture. This is just, as I said, an action to get people to stop talking about how they mishandle their academy drivers and just prove that, look, okay, just shut up, we got them there, now it's up to them to see whether or not they sink or swim, because that is a really key fact, because out of all the rookies going, Jack Doohan's tenure within Formula One is the weakest. Not through lack of skill, because his junior career has shown that he is a fairly solid pair of hands, and he has been up there. He has earned the spot of being third in the Formula 2 Championships, I think, in 2023, but it just feels like Alpine are just going like, yeah, well, yeah, okay, fine. I mean, had it not been for Franco ending up with all of those mishaps and maladies and stuff that, to be fair, were also caused by Williams not actually taking him seriously at points, especially in Brazil, then Franco might be next to Pierre. And it's also clear that the team is keen to continue its move away from Renault's influence, and Renault are not all that fussed in sticking around themselves. Yes, Oaks has now opened up a little bit as to why the team chose Mercedes power for 2026, but the response was unfortunately, and not surprisingly, generic. It didn't lessen the conviction that I have come next year, the team will become high-tech, and Renault's involvement will diminish to that of a minor investor like in the Lotus days. But yeah, it's become perfectly clear that as a result, Doohan has it all to, well, do. His temperament is sound, and with Gasly succeeding in his pushing out of Ocon from the team, this pairing is not a fractious one, and the team would do well to see the season through with both of them at the very least, without dangling a certain Argentinian over the Australian's head. Now granted, in the eyes of Briatore, who is extremely old school, this might be the fire that is needed to light up Jack's backside and make him absolutely dance, but in my honest opinion, that's not the way I would go about things personally. I get why they're doing it, I just don't like it. But either way, it's a stable lineup, it's not the most exciting out there, but I think Alpine will be okay. I feel like Doohan will pick things up quickly, he didn't disgrace himself in Abu Dhabi. I feel like over the winter, Alpine will try their best to at least give Jack the best possible opportunity. But they will also not give him that much time, because come the end of the flyaway races, if he's struggling and then Alpine are behind Haas, Aston Martin and even Racing Bulls, also what doesn't help is I barely see anyone talk about Jack, and that's really not helpful to his cause. Because Franco, oh, everyone's talking about him. Next up, it's Sauber with Hülkenberg and Bortoleto. When it comes to that lineup, I rate it higher than Alpine because of the potential that these two have to lift the team up. Getting Hülkenberg and the current defending F2 champion Gabriel Bortoleto, that's a pretty major coup. It's certainly a pairing that makes me go, oh, okay, this could be interesting. Much like with Hadjar and Doohan, there are many unknown factors to consider about how they will handle a Formula One car, these rookies, over the course of a whole year. The same applies to Bortoleto. However, out of all of the rookies coming into F1, I have the most confidence in Gabi, in the sense that he was the most consistent out of all of the drivers who had to deal with an F2 car that would be all over the place in terms of pace and reliability. Got drivers going up and down the order, having great days and then bad days, the teams rising and then falling, whereas Bortoleto remained a relatively steady constant. Hadjar was not too bad as well, but then of course, as I said, he had reliability issues and team issues, but I would say Gabi was the most stable. Nico is also a steady pair of hands, and his efforts over at Haas helped contribute to the team getting back on its feet again, and I believe that he will do the same with Sauber as it becomes Audi. To what extent exactly? I'm not exactly sure, but these two will be fine, and the team are very lucky to have them. However, even though I really rank Gabi very, very well, I don't think he'll be the highest scoring rookie of the season. I think he will be very lucky to be able to get maybe 3 or 5 points or something like that, because Sauber, they've got it all to do. I really don't see them focusing too much on 2025, because Audi, they will want to be hitting the ground running and completely prove all the doubters wrong who are saying that Audi at the moment have the weakest engine going into the new rule set. I really don't see that happening, because they hired Mattia Binotto for a reason, and that was because of how good he was in helping the production of a power unit, the 2019 one, which was really, arguably, right up there with Mercedes, if not better. It's just a shame that the FIA got involved and then we saw 2020 happening. But even then, Binotto helped rise them back up to 2022 when Leclerc was the last person other than Verstappen to be leading the World Championship. I believe in Binotto, and not just because I look like his estranged British son. But yeah, 2025, I don't see either Hülkenberg or Bortoleto being locked into P19 and 20. I think they'll be able to mix it together with Racing Bulls and Williams at some point. But yeah, it's still going to be a tall order for them to be anything other than maybe 9th at best. This next bit, now this might shock you. I've got Russell and Antonelli. What? What's this pair doing down here, Law? I thought you said Kimi would outscore Lawson in 2025. You hypocrite! Yes, I did say that, and I do wish Kimi Antonelli very well in that endeavour, and I believe him in an individual capacity. However, may I remind you, I'm looking about lineups which are exciting me and in relative to where they are in the championship order. Sure, I do believe that Mercedes have a good chance of maybe securing third place in the Constructors, but Kimi is probably the biggest question mark I have going into 2025. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if he's the biggest question mark for everybody who has an opinion about Formula One. No one's quite sure whether or not he is definitely the next Max Verstappen, or he ends up being a guy who was brought into Formula One way too soon, Toto wanting his brand new Max, and this betting on the farm being the downfall of Toto, and him probably ending up resigning and giving up his share in the team. So yeah, this is a do or die thing from Wolf. And also you got to remember, Verstappen versus Russell, right now, Max has it by a fair bit. So that's why Red Bull do supersede Mercedes at the time being. So do take that into account. And also, you got to remember, this is Mercedes. Sure, they're not the titans of the late 2010s anymore, but they are still up there in the mix of the front runners. So by putting Kimi amongst said runners, it brings up the same questions that people had with Hamilton at McLaren before the 2007 season kicked in. It can go in any direction. It could end up being a masterstroke and Kimi is ending up being a world champion within the next 2 or 3 years or something like that, or it could fail spectacularly, completely ruining a really absolutely wondrous talent in the junior category, and saying they really should have given him another season in F2 with Prema once they got their act together and people could actually see him being a championship contender. But hey, we've got Kimi right now, so there you go. But to be fair, this decision to put Kimi in right now does have some logic to it in preparing for the real challenge that is next season, 2026, giving the rookie a whole year to find his feet and really get involved in the team, and with, of course, Pete Bonington, his new race engineer. And they're not asking him to hit the ground running, unlike with Red Bull and Liam Lawson, because you're not seeing Toto anymore saying, yes, my boy Kimi, he can win the world title in the next couple of years or so. No, they're basically saying, yes, well, Kimi, if he does make a mistake or two, then it's not really a big deal. It's part of the thing about him learning in Formula One. And then you got Max Verstappen saying, yeah, mate, don't worry about it, just make your own mistakes, and then otherwise you'll do fine. I mean, look at me, look where I am today. Lol. They are prepared for him to make errors and not being near the front. Now, either this is Mercedes sandbagging in the extreme again, or this is pragmatism at work, which is a welcome relief if true. In any case, it'll draw criticism from some circles of the fandom, so that uncertainty is present. And George Russell is a factor as well, because now, this will be his first season since 2021 when he is the de facto team leader of the squad looking to try and better where they currently find themselves. With Williams, they didn't want to be near the back, and in 2021, they succeeded. They won't last. And also, there are some opportunities for him to actually secure a couple of more wins next season. He's managing to really improve his reputation in the wet, because Brazil, that was an absolute masterstroke. If only Mercedes didn't bring him in when he did, he might have actually contested for the win and really had a really close battle with Max, a proper one, not like with Canada when we were denied that and they were bickering with Lando, all that stuff. But one thing to remember is that both drivers' contracts end at the end of this season. And even though I suspect that George will get an extension, the timing will be critical. If Kimi gets his contract extension before George, it'll be a blow to the Brits' confidence for sure, like it was for Sebastian at Ferrari when Charles secured his 5-year deal and Vettel got nothing other than his marching orders before 2020 began. But really, it comes down to how much Mercedes will trust George in that leadership position. That is still something I'm not quite sure of, because we've seen time and time again, George comes up with something on the fly, and Mercedes either rebuke him or ignore him, and then things happen, and then George is seen as much of somebody who's a bit of a whinger. So Mercedes then stonewalling George at times really doesn't help his own reputation as being somebody who is the master complainer of Formula One. And seriously, I do feel like he can be a compelling challenger to Max in the right car, because there is no love lost between them. So yeah, for now, I'm limiting my expectations of Mercedes. Because by contrast, I expect Haas to be a really exciting lineup who trusts them without question or pause. The pairing of Esteban and Oliver is probably the most exciting pair that the team has ever had, and why they outrank even Mercedes in my honest opinion. Because from the way I see it, this is yet the next phase of Ayo Komatsu's plan to eschew the old reputation and legacy of Haas, them being the team that only takes on battle-scarred veterans that would have no place in any other team. You know, Romain Grosjean, Kevin Magnussen, they were pretty much outcasts of their respective teams. Those days are done. The lineup of Ocon and Behrman is far more conventional, and I think it will be more effective, and I am calling it now. Esteban will secure the team's first podium in 2025. And I know it's de rigueur to hate on Esteban Ocon and that he will doom Haas to a season of pain and negativity like we saw at Alpine in his final races with them, some people might say, but I don't see that happening. Instead, I see a man who has had a huge weight lifted off his shoulders with a teammate who has shown solid adaptability to F1 as well on short notice, and one that Haas also believes in. The level of confidence that these two drivers have, it pretty much rivals those at the top, like Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren, Haas. They're really going up and up and up in Formula One right now. Not just because they've got a brand new lineup and a new team principle is actually shown to be really effective and positive for them. They've also got the Toyota collaboration. They've also got an upgrade path, also a bit more conventional, but actually effective. Wow, they're actually a proper team. They actually had it within them after all. And going from a position where I didn't really care much about how Haas did in 2024, I now want them to beat Aston Martin. I think a lot of you out there want the same thing. Granted, we have yet to see any of this play out, but judging from Behrman's regular FP1 outings with them, as well as the initial test day Ocon got with Haas in Abu Dhabi, there is an air of optimism which 12 months ago was non-existent at the team. Them not quite sure whether or not they would even be in F1 much longer. However, them being ahead of Mercedes in my rankings is subject to change. It really depends on how well Antonelli settles in and whether or not he actually can take it to George and really help Mercedes out with maybe at least getting third in the Constructors, maybe more. If he has a tour de force in 2025, then oh yeah, that lineup of Antonelli and Russell could be way better than they are in P6 at the moment. But right now, Ocon and Behrman, I have complete conviction that this is a fantastic lineup that will serve Haas well for quite some time. I don't see this lineup changing for at least a few more years. Well, that is until Lewis Hamilton or Charles Leclerc leaves Ferrari and then Behrman makes a step up, because let's remember, he is still part of the Ferrari Driver Academy. Then we've got Verstappen and Lawson in fourth. Really? Only fourth, Law? Well, like with other rookies and young drivers, there are some question marks, but they are much smaller ones than others on the list, since Liam has had a fairly decent chunk of time, half a season equivalent in an F1 car, over the last couple of years. However, the mindset going into 2025 will be completely different. He is going to be embarking on a full season campaign from start to finish. 24 races over 9 months. That is completely different to just having a few races here or there subbing in for another driver, basically told, hey, go out there, have some fun, do what you can, but other than that, as Christian Horner would always say, just give it a go. And Lawson could prove to be very solid and ready for the challenge, but equally could prove to be yet another second driver casualty in the team's pursuit to provide Max Verstappen a car that he can drive to his 5th World Championship in, and to stave off any idea of the Dutchman leaving the team, since his father is yet again bringing up and stirring the pot about saying that him leaving earlier than 2028, Verstappen, isn't out of the question. But then at the same time, you get the sense that Red Bull is now embarking itself on a really tricky balancing act, because it's aware that it needs to provide Verstappen a car that can actually be competitive enough to be going for a 5th world title, but it's also got, as Horner has now said, the mission to protect Lawson at all costs. Red Bull need Liam Lawson to do well and be good enough to then take over as the team leader eventually if Verstappen does quit early. They cannot allow Lawson to fail. They are hoping that whatever the RB21 ends up being, that both drivers, like with McLaren, how both drivers actually have a similar driving style, that they can both sync up well and be much closer and much more at pace than Checo and Verstappen were. And even though I think Red Bull will want to come back swinging in 2025 and actually still have a decent chance at some championship glory, I think really they are focusing on 2026, because at least Christian Horner is now coming up and saying that maybe the Red Bull powertrains unit might not be the best out there, and also accepting that in recent times especially, it's rare for a brand new engine supplier to come in and be the best. It's extremely unusual and unlikely, but hey, 2025, I feel like Lawson and Verstappen could be good. It's still interesting. I wish Lawson well, but I don't think it's the best lineup out there or the most exciting for me personally. Because next up, we've got a little bit of a surprising entry. Sainz and Albon in third. A Williams in third place, and not in the rain. That's something that we've not seen in a long time, and that is precisely my point. The lineup of Carlos and Alex is the most exciting pairing we've seen at Williams since the days of Webber and Heidfeld back in 2005, 20 years ago. You might be arguing, well, wait a minute, what about Valtteri Bottas and Felipe Massa? They were pretty solid. Yes, indeed they were. And they were present when Williams were flirting with the top teams in 2014 and 15, but then again, they fell down, Bottas went to Mercedes. We really didn't see them legitimately contesting for wins, although Massa had a couple of opportunities for pole position. He got a cheeky podium in Monza. That was nice to see. But realistically, I say the last pairing where you could legitimately say they were both there on merit and not being paid drivers at Williams, that is mainly the case, I think, for maybe, arguably, Webber and Heidfeld, maybe Rosberg and Webber in 2006, but that was the beginning of the team's decline. But I still think that the combination of Albon and Sainz is a really fascinating one, and one that is being done a great disservice online, because many people are joking, or even being serious, that, oh no, Carlos is sacrificing his career, oh, Williams will be doomed to the back of the grid for all eternity, ah! No, that's not going to happen. This lineup is going to be spicy, and not because there's going to be intra-team rivalry, because something Alex Albon said, whilst okay, he is relinquishing the idea of being the team leader, he's rolling over to Carlos, but at the same time, it's meaning he's not playing the game, that both drivers are being mature about it and realizing, hey, we want to make sure that Williams actually does well and gets back to where it deserves to be. Yes, Carlos will most likely outperform Alex to a certain extent, but I reckon that they will work fairly well together because Carlos does view Alex as a great human, which is a weird thing to say, but I appreciate the sentiment, and that relieves me a lot because, like I said, this is the first time I can easily say that this combination of Williams drivers is here based on skill, and they will do well with that team. These are solid drivers. This is something I could not say because for the longest time, Williams were relying on people that came with a lot of sponsors and a lot of money. But I did feel somewhat optimistic that in 2022, when Jos Capito was the team principal, he kept Nicholas Latifi around in 2022 based on all of the stuff that he was able to do for the team on merit. They said they didn't need the Safina sponsorship money he had. It was a nice thing to have. Williams are not a pay team anymore. This is not a team that is going to be saddled with drama between the two drivers. Well, there might be some drama if they still can't recognize the fact that they need to make a car that isn't so sensitive that it's going to keep crashing all the time. They really need to fix that. Then, okay. This is going to be tricky. The top two. Now, just with a gnat's breath, it's Ferrari before McLaren. And I know you're probably going to be saying, oh, Lord, you and your McLaren bias. Much like in 2024, McLaren and Ferrari are here pretty much tied in terms of potential, talent, and ability to mesmerize as a double act. You've got the credentials of Lewis Hamilton as the most successful driver in the sport's history, driving for one of the longest ever and most successful teams in the sport as well, and the ever-growing force that is Charles Leclerc, going up against the galvanized Lando Norris at McLaren after an immense 2024 campaign, with the dark horse that is Oscar Piastri. Both drivers and both pairings are excellent, and they have the opportunity to be the best. But the thing that keeps Ferrari from the top spot is something that I have said time and time again: uncertainty. Uncertain results for Lewis, and the possibility of intra-team fireworks as both men contest for superiority, which Ferrari has no hesitation to enact. Of course, this might fail to materialise, with Vasseur maybe looking to Leclerc and Hamilton and wanting to actively brush off such things as team orders for the sake of team success, but that isn't a guarantee based on Ferrari's history. But I think it would be unfair to say that Ferrari have made a bad call with Hamilton. It is absolutely a huge and immense gamble, but it's one that could easily pay off, and as I said quite a few times back in the last few months, is that Lewis's career will not end on a whimper akin to what Damon Hill experienced back in 1999. There is no doubt that Ferrari will be going into 2025 in a better position than Mercedes will be, and the simple act of a change of scenery could be enough to energise Lewis into a better version of himself, which many pundits, including DC, view as disappointing in comparison to the old Hamilton. And I do believe that Lewis will be better this year than last year. But will it be enough to be a world champion with the Scuderia on the first bounce? Or is there going to be something that we need to consider? This will be the first time where Lewis is not the centre of the team that he is based at. He is part of the Ferrari machine. Ferrari doesn't work for you. You work for Ferrari. I hope Lewis remembers that. And I also hope that the fans play ball and they keep their act together on social media and don't end up becoming a distraction for the team. There are just so many questions to be had, but still, it's a really, really compelling lineup. As for McLaren, the thing that just sees them squeak past Ferrari here on this list is that the team has made it clear that intra-team fracturing will not be tolerated. And also, there are far more many things that are concrete and locked in place already to have a little bit more confidence and certainty going into 2025, the most exciting season of all time, or at least in the last few years. And sure, there were instances this year where both Piastri and Norris saw that one was being favoured over the other, but at the same time, both men were also willing to accept to help out their teammate, and they got it paid back in return. You really got to commend Lando for gifting the sprint win to Oscar, like Oscar gifted the sprint win in Brazil. Yeah, this could all change as the year progresses, and both drivers sense that they are both contenders for the world title, but as far as I see it, McLaren have got everything in place for a believable shot at retaining the team title back-to-back for the first time since 1991. The fact that we know what Piastri and Norris are capable of when working together is the thing that really edges them past Ferrari. We know so much more about the McLaren setup than we do with the Ferrari one. That is the biggest thing that prevents me from putting Hamilton and Leclerc at the top. That is the only reason. Whether or not that's a long-term situation, I don't know. But in here and now, I think McLaren are the odds-on favourite to be defending Constructors' Champions. But either way, I am glad that both Ferrari and McLaren classic teams have great lineups, their own strengths and weaknesses, and they are both contesting for the World Team title. That just feels right. And there's no chance of the team themselves to actively set each driver against one another, unlike with Toro Rosso back in the day with Carlos and Max. And to find out more about the revelations that Carlos Sainz just dropped about his really toxic rookie year, go and watch this video next, straight after this one.